Look at yourself, Marcus, my wife Angela said, her voice cutting through the silence of our kitchen like shrapnel through Kevlar. You've got nothing left. 3 deployments. And what do you have to show for it? You can't even hold a conversation anymore. You just sit there like a ghost. I stood in the doorway, still wearing my ACUs from the base, having just returned from my final out-processing appointment. 15 months in Afghanistan. 3 tours in 8 years. And this was my homecoming. She gestured dismissively at the stack of military documents on the counter. My discharge papers, final pay statements, benefits information. All that time overseas, and for what? We're still in the same apartment, driving the same old car. Meanwhile, I've been holding everything together here, building a real life. Her tone carried a familiar edge of resentment that had grown sharper with each deployment cycle that I remained silent, watching her performance. With the emotional distance I'd developed during countless operations where showing reaction could mean death, Angela mistook my composure for the shell-shocked resignation she'd been describing to her friends and family for months. What she couldn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was that during my time overseas, I had been methodically building something she'd never bothered to ask about. And in the past 72 hours, as I'd listened to her complaints through overseas phone calls, I had made strategic decisions that would fundamentally alter our relationship. I can't do this anymore, she continued, pacing our small kitchen with the same restless energy I'd seen in civilians who'd never learned to find peace and stillness. I need someone who's actually present, who can provide more than a military paycheck and war stories nobody wants to hear. I nodded once, acknowledging her statement without agreeing to its premises. I understand, I said quietly, my voice carrying the calm I'd learned in situations where panic meant failure. You should know that I've made some arrangements during my final weeks overseas. We should probably discuss them. Angela's expression shifted slightly, perhaps detecting something in my tone that suggested this conversation wasn't proceeding as she'd expected. What kind of arrangements? I reached for the folder I'd set on the counter beside my deployment gear. Financial arrangements. Security arrangements. The kind of preparations someone makes when they're transitioning from military to civilian life. I opened the folder deliberately, revealing documents she hadn't seen before. You might want to sit down for this conversation. My name is Marcus Thompson, 32 years old, Staff Sergeant in the United States Army with 11 years of active duty. Service culminating in 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan. I serve as a communications intelligence analyst, specializing in electronic warfare and signal intercept operations, work that requires methodical thinking, attention to detail, and the ability to process complex information under extreme pressure. My military career has been built on discipline, strategic planning, and understanding that survival often depends on anticipating problems before they materialize. That I met Angela Rodriguez 6 years ago during my first leave period after initial deployment. She was working as a medical technician at Fort Campbell, beautiful and vivacious, with the kind of energetic social personality that balanced my more reserved, analytical nature. Our connection was immediate. She represented stability and normalcy after months of combat operations, while I apparently provided the security and adventure she found attractive in military men. That we married after a 6-month courtship, a timeline that seems rushed in retrospect but felt appropriate given the compressed reality of military relationships. Deployment cycles create urgency around major life decisions. You either commit fully or maintain casual relationships that can't survive extended separations. Angela and I chose commitment, exchanging vows in a small ceremony witnessed by fellow soldiers and her civilian family who viewed my career with a mixture of pride and concern. The early months of our marriage coincided with my transition to specialized intelligence training, which kept me stateside for nearly 2 years, the longest continuous period we would spend together throughout our relationship. During this time, we established financial systems, shared goals, and what appeared to be effective communication patterns. Angela continued working while I advanced through intelligence schools and specialized training programs that would eventually make me valuable for overseas assignments. When my second deployment orders arrived, both of us approached the separation with confidence based on our successful adjustment to military life. The deployment proceeded routinely from my perspective. 12 months of signals intelligence work, regular communication with Angela, and the satisfaction of contributing to mission success while building combat experience and leadership credentials. But something shifted during my absence. Angela's calls became less frequent and more focused on complaints about military life, the loneliness, the financial limitations, the social isolation of being married to someone who was perpetually absent. When I returned, she seemed different, more distant, more critical, less interested in the shared goals we had discussed before deployment. That I attributed these changes to normal adjustment challenges that military families face. The cycle of separation and reunion creates stress that requires patience and understanding from both partners. Rather than addressing the growing distance directly, I focused on making our time together positive and avoiding conflicts that might worsen underlying tensions. My third deployment, the one I had just completed, began 18 months after my return from the second tour. By then, Angela's resentment about military life had crystallized into a steady stream of criticism about my career choices, our financial situation, and what she described as my emotional unavailability. Her complaints suggested she viewed my service as selfish indulgence rather than professional duty or sacrifice for family security. "You choose to keep deploying," she said during one of our final conversations before I left. "Nobody's forcing you to volunteer for these assignments. You could get a normal job, be a normal husband, if you actually wanted to." This fundamental misunderstanding of military obligations revealed how little Angela understood about my career. Despite 6 years of marriage to a soldier, I was a staff sergeant with specialized skills and high demand. My deployment assignments weren't recreational choices, but professional duties that came with significant financial benefits and career advancement opportunities. During the 15 months I spent in Afghanistan on this final deployment, Angela's attitude toward my service and our marriage continued deteriorating. Her communications became increasingly focused on what she wasn't getting from our relationship rather than any interest in my experiences or well-being. Phone calls turned into complaints about having to manage household responsibilities alone, social isolation from not having a present husband, and financial limitations despite the substantial deployment pay and benefits flowing into our joint accounts. More concerning were her references to activities and relationships I wasn't familiar with. New friends whose names appeared regularly in conversation. Social events and trips that seemed inconsistent with our budget. Comments about opportunities she was considering that she described vaguely when questioned directly as someone trained in intelligence analysis. I'm naturally attentive to patterns and inconsistencies in communication. Angela's behavioral changes followed recognizable patterns that suggested either significant personal growth in directions incompatible with military marriage or relationships and activities she wasn't fully disclosing. Given her increasingly hostile attitude toward my career and our shared life, I began considering both possibilities. 3 months before my deployment ended, Angela's hostility reached a new level during a video call that would prove to be our last meaningful conversation. "I can't keep pretending this marriage works," she said, her image pixelated but her frustration clear. "You're never here, and when you are here, you're not really present anyway. I'm wasting the best years of my life waiting for someone who has nothing to offer except money from a job that keeps him away all the time." "What are you saying exactly?" I asked, maintaining the calm tone I used for intelligence briefings despite the emotional implications of her words. "I'm saying I want more than this. I want a partner who's actually available, who can build something real instead of just sending money from overseas while I handle everything alone." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering familiar territory about military life limitations and her growing desire for something different. But what struck me most was her complete lack of interest in my perspective, my experiences, or the sacrifices I was making for our shared financial security. Angela had moved from being a military spouse to being someone who viewed my service as an obstacle to her personal fulfillment. After ending that call, I began making strategic preparations for what appeared to be an inevitable end to our marriage. Using secure communication channels, I contacted a military attorney to understand my legal position. I researched financial options for protecting assets I had accumulated during deployment. Most importantly, I began systematically removing Angela's access to benefits, accounts, and automatic payments that were tied to my military status. This wasn't motivated by vindictiveness, but by practical recognition that Angela had already mentally and emotionally ended our marriage. Her final comment, that I had nothing to offer except money, suggested she viewed our relationship primarily in financial terms. If that was her perspective, then she should experience the financial reality of ending the relationship completely. Over my final 8 weeks in Afghanistan, I methodically restructured our financial arrangements. I removed Angela as beneficiary from my life insurance policies, replacing her with my parents and a veterans charity. I closed our joint bank accounts, transferring funds to individual accounts she couldn't access. I updated my emergency contact information to remove her from all military and benefit systems. Most significantly, I researched Angela's activities during my absence using resources available to intelligence personnel. What I discovered confirmed my suspicions about her behavior and provided additional justification for the financial protection measures I was implementing. Through discreet inquiries and publicly available information, I learned that Angela had been regularly traveling with a group of civilian friends, taking vacations that exceeded what our budget should have allowed. Social media posts showed expensive dinners, spa weekends, and shopping trips that suggested either undisclosed income or debt accumulation I wasn't aware of. More concerning, several posts included a man named Derek Manning, a civilian contractor, who worked with military families in various support capacities. Their interactions in photos and comments suggested a relationship that extended beyond casual friendship, with a timeline that coincided with Angela's growing hostility toward our marriage. Rather than confronting Angela directly about these discoveries, which would have served no purpose except satisfying my curiosity, I focused on completing my financial security measures. By the time I boarded my flight home, Angela's access to military benefits, base privileges, family support services, and our shared accounts had been systematically eliminated. Now, standing in our kitchen as Angela delivered what she clearly expected to be devastating criticism about my worth as a husband, I realized she had no awareness of the changes I had implemented. Her assumption that I was financially and emotionally broken by military service would make the coming conversation particularly instructive for both of us. "You mentioned wanting to discuss our future," I said, placing the folder of documents on the kitchen table. "I think we should start with understanding our current situation." I opened the folder to reveal bank statements, benefit termination notices, and legal documents I had prepared during my final weeks overseas. Angela's expression shifted from confident dismissal to confusion as she recognized official military and financial letterhead. "What is this?" she asked, reaching for the documents. "These are notifications that I've removed you as beneficiary, an authorized user from all military-related accounts and benefits," I explained calmly. "Your base access has been terminated. Your dependent ID expires in 30 days. Your access to military health care ends next week." Angela stared at the papers, processing information that didn't align with her expectations for this conversation. "You can't do this. I'm your wife. I have rights." "You have the rights associated with being married to an active duty service member," I corrected. "Since you've made it clear that role doesn't interest you, and since I've separated from military service as of yesterday, the question is what rights you want as the wife of a civilian veteran." She looked up from the documents, finally understanding that this conversation was proceeding in directions she hadn't anticipated. "What are you talking about? What do you mean, separated from service?" I completed my final deployment and chose not to re-enlist. I said, "As of yesterday afternoon, I'm a civilian. The question now is whether we're going to be civilians together or separately." For the next hour, I explained the changes I had made during my final weeks overseas. Angela learned that her criticism of my worth as a husband had been delivered to someone who had spent months preparing for exactly this conversation. Her assumption that I would return broken and dependent had been severely miscalculated. "I don't understand," she said finally, the confident criticism replaced by genuine bewilderment. "Why would you cut off all the benefits? Why would you leave the military?" "Because you were right about one thing," I replied. "This marriage wasn't working. You wanted a different kind of partner, and I wanted a different kind of marriage. The military gave me resources to build something new. I used those resources." Angela's next question revealed what had been her primary concern throughout our relationship. "What about the money? The deployment pay, the combat pay exclusions, The savings? Secure, I said simply. In accounts you don't have access to, invested in assets that will support the civilian life I'm planning to build. The conversation continued into the evening, covering topics we should have addressed months or years earlier. Angela acknowledged that she had been involved with Derek Manning during my deployment, though she characterized it as emotional support rather than a physical relationship. She admitted to spending deployment money on trips and activities I hadn't known about, using credit cards and loans she had hidden from me. Most importantly, she confronted the reality that her dismissive attitude toward my military service and our marriage had real consequences. I wasn't the broken, dependent veteran she had expected to manage upon my return. Instead, I was someone who had used his final deployment to build independence and security that didn't require her participation or approval. "So what happens now?" she asked as our conversation wound down near midnight. "Now you decide what you actually want," I said. "If you want to rebuild this marriage based on mutual respect and shared goals, we can explore that option. If you want to continue the path you've been on with Derek and your civilian friends, I'll support that decision and make the divorce as straightforward as possible." Angela chose Derek Manning and civilian life. Our divorce was finalized 6 months later with minimal conflict, partly because the financial preparations I had made during deployment protected the assets I had legitimately accumulated through military service. Angela received appropriate spousal support during the transition period, but had no claim to the investment accounts, educational benefits, or other resources I had secured through my own service that a year after our divorce was finalized, I had completed my bachelor's degree using GI Bill benefits and established a consulting practice specializing in communications security for government contractors. The discipline and analytical skills developed during military service translated effectively to civilian career success, providing the financial stability Angela had claimed I lacked. More importantly, I had learned to recognize the difference between partners who support military service and those who view it as competition for attention and resources. When I began dating again, I approached relationships with greater awareness of compatibility around career demands, financial goals, and mutual respect for each other's commitments and sacrifices. Angela married Derek Manning 18 months after our divorce. Through mutual connections, I learned that their relationship had indeed begun during my deployment, as I had suspected. Her complaints about my absence and emotional unavailability had been partially motivated by guilt about her own behavior rather than genuine concerns about our marriage. 3 years after my return from Afghanistan, I received an unexpected message from Angela. Derek's contracting work had ended, leaving them with financial difficulties she hadn't anticipated. She wondered if I might be interested in reconciliation, suggesting that her criticism of military life had been misguided and that she now appreciated the security I had provided. That I responded politely but firmly that we had both moved forward appropriately and that I wished her well in addressing her current challenges. The message confirmed that her primary concern about our marriage had indeed been financial rather than emotional, validating the strategic approach I had taken to protecting myself during our divorce. Today, I'm engaged to Sarah Mitchell, a nurse practitioner who served 2 tours as a military medic and understands both the demands and rewards of service life. Our relationship is built on mutual respect, shared values, and compatible approaches to career and financial planning. She appreciates rather than resents the discipline and strategic thinking I developed during military service. After my 3rd deployment, my wife said I had nothing left, not knowing that included her access to. Her assessment of my worth was based on superficial observations and fundamental misunderstanding of both military service and my personal character. By methodically protecting the resources and benefits I had earned through service, I ensured that the end of our marriage didn't also mean the end of the financial security I had built through years of sacrifice and separation. The experience taught me that some relationships can't survive the stresses of military life, but that survival often depends more on shared values and mutual support than on external circumstances. Angela's inability to appreciate my service or sacrifice was a fundamental incompatibility that no amount of patience or compromise could overcome. Recognizing this reality and acting strategically to protect my future rather than hoping for changes that would never come was perhaps the most important tactical decision I made during that final deployment. Military service teaches you to plan for multiple contingencies, and to protect your resources and personnel under all circumstances. Those same principles apply to relationships and civilian life. Sometimes the greatest victory is recognizing when a position can't be held and executing a strategic withdrawal that preserves your ability to fight another day on more favorable terms.